Hi there, folks. We're going to get started in about 30 minutes. Hi.
Good morning.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Good morning or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have an incredibly large group. We actually had to up our Zoom allowance, which I think is really great. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. We're the Traveling Exhibits Network, so we're a professional group associated with the American Alliance of Museums. So before we get started, if I can just ask everyone who is not a presenter, if I can just ensure that you are muted, that would be great. Awesome. Thank you so much. So overall, we're going to have a group chat going just because we do have so many folks that are on this call. Miss Monica Humphrey from the Children's Museum of Indianapolis is going to be helping us out by moderating the chat. So if you do have any specific questions about the topics that we're going to be discussing today, or if you do want to add in your 2 cents, we would most definitely love for you to add either say, hey, I'd like to add my 2 cents, or type your question into the chat. So getting started here. All right, so we are very lucky to have our great board with us today. We were hoping to really meet everyone in San Francisco, but the universe decided to take a sharp left turn here, so here's where we are. We have Sarah Myers on the call from the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. Myself, I'm Cynthia Brown. I am coming to you live from Minneapolis. I'm with Museum EXP. We have Shane McConnell here from Little Rays Nature Center. Debbie Donohue from Imagine Exhibitions. AJ Gailey is not with us today because she welcomed a new member of her family last week in this entire mess. So please send her an email. And then we have Heather Farnworth from Ontario Science Center, who is also joining us.
Hi.
All right, so before we get started, I really just want to take a moment and acknowledge that every single person that came on the call today, we all came together in less than 12 hours from the moment when our email came out. I think it's really a testament to our passion for museums and exhibitions, and our commitment to really helping each other as we get through this and try to move forward with a cohesive plan. I should also mention that we have an extremely diverse group of organizations on this call today with different initiatives, different operating budgets, and there truly is not an easy button in this whole situation. And we really have to keep that in mind as we're going into the next few months. But it's our hope that by sharing, the conversations that we've been having with our collaborators, with our colleagues, that we can better arm you with tangible steps and questions to help you move forward in this time of ambiguity. For this first call, we're really focusing on the logistics relating to upcoming turnovers. I think under normal circumstances, we would be excitedly de-installing our spring shows, planning to install our summer exhibitions, and as we know, there's kind of an immediate need and a lot of uncertainty on how to coordinate as an industry. And so we decided to quickly boot together this call to address these questions. So my apologies in advance if we run into any technical difficulties. But generally, the museum opening dates are really kind of a moving target. Some museums in North America are moving towards a June 1st opening, whereas others are looking at July 1st. Or even later. Some museums are looking at restricting capacity when we open based on a 30, 60, 90 approach. There's a really interesting thread on Aztec that I suggest that you all take a peek at. And this has really brought up a lot of questions about what our exhibitions look like when we do reopen, and can we truly present them in the same way? So I would love to just quickly pick on Heather and Sarah, and just if you guys could share some of the conversations that you guys are having at your museum about reopening and how this is a really tricky topic.
Sure, I can go first. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So at the Ontario Science Centre, we are currently closed, and there are probably about 250 employees all trying to work from home right now to the best that we can. And you know, some people are really equipped to work from home, and others aren't. But you know, we're working through that. But one of the key things that we're looking at is our business continuity planning. And what does that look like? So the Ontario Science Centre is part of government. And so we're taking our cues from the ministry and following what is going on through our premier and also our mayor in Toronto. And one of the things that's going on with us is that our schools are closed at least until I think the end of May now. So there's probably not an opportunity for us to open until then. But we are, you know, Cynthia mentioned the 30, 60, 90 planning, and that's what we're doing right now. So we're looking at everything from, do we phase people in? We have a lot of fabricators and shop people that it's possible we could bring them in as we start to look at exhibit maintenance and cleaning, but then we have to look at protocols of how we are going to be cleaning. How are we going to control visitors coming in? Looking at attendance patterns. What are we doing with our OmniMax theater? There's lots of things that we need to think about, and you know, looking to guidance from our ministry in terms of what's going on for planning. And you know, as Cynthia also mentioned, there's lots of really great threads happening on the AAM, as well as Aztec and some of our other colleagues in Europe and Asia who are a little bit ahead of us. So it's interesting to try and see what they're doing in terms of you know, reopening and preparing. I think that you know, we don't have a crystal ball. We're just planning what the rollout would be, and then if it shifts to June or July or whatever that might be, at least you know, we have a plan that we can implement rather quickly. So that's my perspective from the Science Centre at the moment. Sarah?
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I'm having some video issues. I'm not sure why I'm a black screen, but maybe, I don't know, it's craziness. Just like everybody else, the Children's Museum of Indianapolis is currently closed for the unseeable future. Our leadership team has been very great and very supportive during this time. They are meeting every single morning to look at the current situation for that day and for the outlook. They have directed a team of staff to start developing plans so how we could possibly reopen. So we're looking at multiple scenarios. For example, do we open and, you know, do we change the staff planning? So do staff go from leading programs throughout the day, and programs are now removed from our schedule, and we start having those staff clean monitors and clean equipment all throughout the day? So how are we changing the work that our staff is currently doing for the next, you know, couple months or however long needed? So we're looking at that approach, different scenarios to lay out, so we're ready once we do decide to reopen, that we have options that we can go with. You know, we're looking at pulling all fabric off the floor right now. So any fabric food, any you know tangible fabric pieces, interactives, so stuff like that. So we're looking at as a museum as a whole, and then drilling down to individual elements and items throughout the museum. We also are looking at how we bring staff back in. We are currently in the middle of building our new traveling exhibition. It'd be great to get staff back in the building as soon as possible, but we also know that the health risk is still great. So we're developing plans for how we approach getting our exhibition built and the new rollout plan for that as well. So just like everybody else, everything's up in the air for us, but we are trying to develop different scenarios and different plans so we are ready once we have a better grasp on what's going to happen in the future. So thanks.
Awesome. And I see that we had a question here about the 30, 60, 90 plan. I think every museum is looking at this a little bit differently. So 30, 60, 90 is, from what I understand, the first 30 days is at 50% capacity, and then so on and so on. Yeah, I think this is something that's still developing, and that it means a little bit different. It means a little bit different things for each institution, and what your typical visitorship looks like. Okay, so before we really jump in, go back. We've structured this call to focus on the things that we can really control right now. I think since most of us are exhibition folks, we're used to troubleshooting and fixing things, and we really just want to find a path forward. So for each topic, we're going to cover actionable items and pose questions for you, even if we don't have the answers to them right here and now, to help you put together a cohesive plan. And we'll discuss topics like contracts, storage, and then open up discussions after each one. I would also like to note that we are not attorneys. And so we're not able to really advise on the particulars of contracts, but we are here to help you find resources and help navigate this to the best of our abilities. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Debbie.
Great. Hi, everybody. So I think everybody is, pretty involved right now in creating a contingency plan for their exhibition and looking at both the spring and the summer, right? So the first item, we've put together just a list of questions for you guys to be thinking about, to be talking about. And so we'll go over those, and every institution's quite different, right? Everybody has different needs. So hopefully some of these questions help you guys get through this process. So the first is, of course, getting in contact, check in with whoever your contact is, right? Has that person changed? Do you need to add anybody else to the communication list? Do you have a communication plan? Are you talking every week, every 2 weeks? As we all know and are experiencing, things are happening very quickly in terms of changes within our world and what we know about COVID-19. I don't think that we don't have a lot of answers in the world right now. We have a lot of questions, but we don't have a lot of answers. So creating a communication plan during this time is really essential. Talking about local restrictions is also really important. So again, this is it's going to change depending on your organization and the host venue. So for example, can staff be in the building right now? Do you need staff to be in the building? Do you have freight that's coming that needs to go somewhere? Do you have live animals? What sort of local restrictions do you need to be thinking about that could impact your exhibition or your exhibition getting there? Are the state borders closed? So going through a lot of these questions with each other and seeing what the local scenario is really important right now. Inquiring and discussing the schedule. So it's really important to look at what is your schedule, the traveling exhibition schedule flexibility, what's the host venue flexibility, working to create a win-win situation for both of you. And I think, this is where there's a lot of communication needed, right? And a lot of questions, looking at a lot of different scenarios, since nobody really knows the exact opening date right now. So being flexible, communicating, and asking a lot of questions. And from those, what sort of amendments need to be made to the contract? Who is responsible for doing that? Making sure that when people do know that they can reopen, what needs to be changed, and documenting all of those things. Cynthia, do you want to work on the next ones? I think you're still on mute.
Thanks. I think the other thing that we really need to think about is, do you need a plan in place to really absorb costs? If you have exhibitions that are currently in other countries, do you need to think about those custom fees and what is the plan to bring your exhibition back to your museum? Do you need to plan for contingency storage, which we're going to be talking a little bit about later? What types of things do you need to layer in? Do you have restrictions by your board as to your folks are not able to travel, where you need to rely on outsourced labor? These are all things that, in a contingency plan, you're probably going to want to be thinking about, and also putting in, a bigger cushion into your overall turnover schedules. And then also, with the time that we're in right now, what type of travel protocols do you have in place to ensure the safety of your crew? We're going to be talking a little bit more about this later, but it would probably be good to set some ground rules as to working conditions, but also how your crew is traveling safely with your exhibition. We also strongly recommend that everyone institutes cleaning protocols and guidelines for your exhibitions. I think this is probably going to become standard in FAQs for future exhibitions. And our friends at OMSI actually shared their cleaning protocols and guidelines, which are going to be linked at the very end of this presentation. And then, kind of thinking towards the future, how can you support venues as they reopen? If you have a branded exhibition, are you able to bring in some of those characters like Indianapolis Children's has done with Paw Patrol? Or if it's an artifact-based exhibition, are you able to do some sort of a reveal to, specifically help drive attendance? And then, on the flip side, maybe you need to relook at floor plans and see if you can redo layouts so that people are not congregating in certain areas and that you have a little bit more space between components. All right, so as we kind of move into the discussions of challenges with current venues, knowing that we're going to be talking about contracts and storage in separate discussions here, I just wanted to pick on Carrie, Reid, if you are on the call. We had a really great conversation earlier this week about how she was really partnering with her production team and how she was looking at reorganizing some of their tour schedules, and I thought that we could kind of share.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so there's only so much that we can do right now, and one of those things that my colleagues are working on is beefing up our deinstallation manuals in the case that we don't attend a strike. Our venues, our clients have been super awesome in being flexible with us, so we might not be able to get to Edinburgh to take down a 10,000 square foot dinosaur exhibit. We might be joining them on Skype and striking through video together. But for the most part, the exhibitions that are in the dark will remain so until we can get crews there, or until we can get trucks there and get people into the venue so that they can pack the crates and get them out the doors. We have organized a lot of our schedules where we can and bumped the next venue to the end of our available slots. But that's presenting some tricky issues. So we're taking it day by day and week by week and just keeping the conversation open. And in many cases, we have plan A, plan B, and plan C. Some institutions are waiting week by week and hoping that they'll open on June 1st with our exhibit that's sitting here in Minnesota right now. That's very unlikely. So in some cases like that one, we've penciled in a slot on the tour schedule for 2021. just to make sure that they can still get their display period. It may be later, but it still will happen. So I think that the most important thing is that we remain in communication, we're flexible with one another, and in the end, it might work out just fine.
Awesome. And I know, not to pick on you again, Deb, but you've been doing a ton of work with Imagine's portfolio, and I thought that maybe you could share a little bit of your insight as well.
Yeah, I would say that ours is pretty similar to Carrie's. And, you know, the word that keeps coming to my mind is just flexibility, right? I think it's been really amazing for those of you guys who are on the LinkedIn TEN group. You know, a lot of us are volunteering to help anybody where there's needed, right? You know, perhaps if we can't get to Canada, right? Or Canadian organizations can't get here for loadout. Imagine's really fortunate in having people based all over, which is really helpful, but we also just don't really know how long this will be and what borders will open first. So we've been talking very individually with all of our clients and figuring out what would work best for them. And I would say that, again, the word flexible comes to mind, and our clients have been so supportive in also being flexible through these times and working on a scenario that works for all of us.
Awesome. Yeah, and then it looks like we're getting a couple of questions about exhibitions that are kind of stuck in museums. And I hope that Daniel from OMSI was able to join us, but I know that he has a couple of cases where this is going on and might be able to provide some insight in how he's approaching it.
I am here.
Yay.
Yay, yay, I'm here. Sorry, I was muting the train in the background. I hope you guys don't have to hear it too heavily. Yeah, so I've got a couple of fun scenarios going on right now. Most specifically, I am the one traveling exhibit that is at the CDC Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. They are currently not accepting any personnel on there that are not dealing with the COVID-19 response. So I have no idea when I'm getting this exhibit out of here. It's just kind of stuck, which is a cascading effect on other exhibits. You know, it's going to Mobius in Spokane right now. So we're just in constant communication with them on when we are available, how they're available. You know, all host sites have been pretty understanding as things start to roll through. But yeah, that's been one of our biggest challenges. But just, and also trying to plan ahead as we all like to do, and then not being able to lay down plans without the ground changing completely underneath our feet. Which is why I think, you know, as it's been iterated before, open communication is just very, very important for all of our parties right now. I've been trying to figure out who's on the front end and who's on the back end of me, and then other scenarios in my head that we might be able to make all of our clients and host sites happy as things move down the road. But that's the little I have to say right now, unless you have something specific.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, you know, as much as we can, for the most part, you know, a lot of times we're piggybacking on each other. So, you know, my exhibit might be coming in while Debbie's is going out. And so, you know, how can we, you know, coordinate together as exhibit providers, since some of our museum friends are stretched really thin right now. I think, you know, taking some of that guesswork and coordination out would most definitely be appreciated. All right, Monica, do we have any other questions?
So we had Elizabeth ask about the exhibits that were caught mid-display, and she specifically was asking about when a lender wanted to send a courier for takedown. So it might be interesting to see if anybody has communication with people who have differing differences of opinion or different rules in place, and how you're reconciling those?
Sure. Yeah. Elizabeth, do you want to jump on the chat and kind of expand on your question a little bit more?
While she's doing that too, I'll also share that Ulrika was also interested in hearing how people are best managing those remote deinstallations, and I know Carrie touched on that with how you guys are considering it. So yeah, that was another question.
Awesome.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi. Yeah. So my question was, when we closed, I worked at the National Gallery of Canada in Ottawa. I've since been laid off, but I'd like to just talk about the experience before that happened. So we had an exhibit that came from Japan, and it was supposed to close at the end of March, and obviously it kind of got stuck. And so in the contract that we had agreed on with them, they asked to have a courier sent for the takedown. So I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are about how you feel about people coming internationally or within the US and Canada to take down exhibits as sort of being the first step of this sort of domino of shows closing and moving and getting going again as soon as everything starts opening up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, from what I've been hearing, this is a very hot topic amongst registrars as to, especially with artifacts, how to do this safely and efficiently, especially since flying a courier over to deinstall, I know that there's some instances where it's just one object, is not really the safest or best way to approach things. I don't know if anyone on our panel can specifically speak to this question in a little bit more detail. No. So
I do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I think that from a health and safety perspective, with the Ontario Science Centre, we have very strict, like there are people coming in and couriers that are dropping things off, and but we have really strict protocol. Like we're wiping down boxes and we're leaving them at an entrance. And I would be concerned about who these people are. Have they been quarantined? And how that would work. The other thing that I wanted to mention is, if we're looking at people coming in to deinstall, I just want to flag that I think we need to think about what's in our insurance in the clause, because have you seen the exhibit when it's left, or what's the situation? Because I think insurance companies are going to be pretty scrutinizing how, if there's damage, let's say, during transit. So there's just things to think about if someone else is packing up somebody's exhibit. And I'm just flagging that as something to think about. And then the quarantine and health and safety of people coming in your organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in regards to the question about how to best manage remotely overseeing deinstallations, I think we can probably take that offline, as that's going to be a little bit technical for the sake of time. So we can continue that particular discussion in our 10 LinkedIn group. All right. So Heather, if you want to talk about knowing your contract.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think in terms of, as Cynthia said from the beginning, I'm not a lawyer. We're not a lawyer, but I just want to flag a couple of things that, to draw your attention to in your contracts. I mean, God forbid, legal has always said to us, look at your force majeure, look at your language. And I've always thought, yeah, that's great to have. Never thought in a million years that we'd have to really pay attention to all of this, these clauses that are hopefully in our contracts. So in terms of language for the schedule and payments, I know that we're really needing to work together to figure out, what's in the contract, but how can we work together to, look at cash flow issues that each party has. I mean, contracts are put together to protect both parties, and I think we have to keep that in mind as we look at this contract. Regarding force majeure, I find it really interesting. I think the interpretation of a force majeure clause in your contract would need to be looked at by your legal department or area. And it will be also tied very closely to arbitration. So what is the law that's in your contract? There's civil law and the other law, civil law, and which is like France and Quebec here. But I think that we really need to pay attention to that clause and to work with our lawyers and to really look at what the arbitration clause are and the mediation clauses. Again, in terms of insurance claims, I had mentioned, and I know that we can talk about this later, but if somebody else is deinstalling your exhibit, how do you protect yourself if there's damage? Again, looking at the insurance claims and, whether you have someone take photographs if they're putting it in the crates. So I think the crating and packing will be tied very closely to insurance claims. So I'm just flagging that as something to think about in your contract. Likewise with termination and cancellation clauses, just sort of reviewing the terms. And Deb had said that it's all about communication. And I think that we are, in the short term, there's some that are struggling, some places, who knows when they're going to open. But I think that we need to work together because, 6 months from now, we're in this together and we will be partners and we will be hoping to do business together. And so if you have the lens of, as you look at these contracts, they were put together, as I said, to protect both parties. But there are ways that we can work together and have a win-win for both of us, because we are going to be working together in the future. So we want to make sure that we do this right and be kind to one another.
All right, so it looks like we have some questions here in the chat. Audrey, did you have a question?
Let me unmute myself. Hi, everybody. Heather actually covered it. I was just curious when you were talking about, what to do if you have an exhibition in your hall that belongs in Japan or whatever, especially when there are specimens involved. And my thought was just that force majeure should cover you from having to take any kind of risk whatsoever. It doesn't make a bit of sense to try to deinstall during this, I don't think. But you covered that, Heather, so that's great. Thanks.
Awesome. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to discuss in relation to contracts or any sticky situations that you're finding yourselves in that you'd like to voice to the group?
Just make sure if you hold an exhibit longer than you originally planned, make sure that it's still under your insurance. Check your COI and make sure that that exhibit's held longer. Because if something would happen, water damage or something would happen post the end of that term, you might be in trouble and have to pay out of pocket to fix that exhibit component that's broken.
Mm-hmm. Good point, Sarah. All right. All right, so then we're going to kind of get into some of these layers of complexity, which again, we don't have exact answers on this, but we want to pose questions just to make sure that they're at the back of your mind as you go through some of these issues. So in regards to your touring staff, you might want to just ask, how is your staff doing? Do they feel comfortable to travel? Is there anyone on your staff, or do they have family members that are at risk where they may not be comfortable in putting themselves in that sort of situation? But at the same time, unless you specifically ask them, they may not feel comfortable voicing that concern. And, you know, what are the labor restrictions at your venue? I know if Paul from the fleet is on, he had shared some things about that he doesn't even have access to his museum right now. So we can have Paul jump in on that later. And then, you know, be sure to check how this situation is affecting any labor, specifically union labor. I know here in Minneapolis, it's affecting our local IATSE folks. So you may want to check into that as well. And then I know that many museums are looking at having folks either driving versus flying for the next turnover. And I just want to point out at the end of this presentation, we're going to be sharing a link. We have a 10 helpers spreadsheet, which is a list of local labor where if you do need to tap into some of your museum friends to help you with some of your deinstalls or installs, or even just to check on things, these are folks that have volunteered to be your point of contact and help you through this situation. Yeah, and then I should also mention that, again, just to kind of piggyback on what Heather was saying, that you should be clear on what, if any, that your workman's comp liability covers should one of your staff get sick while they're out on the road. So always good to really check into that. And then licensing, Sarah.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, so it's very important to keep your brand licensor abreast of the current rental venue situations. They want to know and also be a part of decisions that affect their brand image. I recommend sending your brands updates on your current and your summer venues, and keep them in the loop as an FYI, and really show that you're a good steward of their brand, even in times of crisis. I mean, I know every organization's license agreements are set up differently. Some payments are based on percentage of rental fees, some are flat out amounts, some are MGs, but speak candidly with your licensor about the financial struggles that museums are facing right now, and give them a heads up that their royalties could be affected by this. One challenging concern that I've been faced with is some brands don't want to be tied to any type of promotion currently that encourages people to leave their homes. And until the COVID situation is resolved, they don't want their name on anything. Since our crystal balls are a little broken right now, and we do not know when this will end, this means that some summer rentals might have to hold on their summer marketing campaigns until granted permission to promote the exhibitions with the branded titles. At the Children's Museum, we don't call our brands our brand licensors, we call them our partners. And this is a time that we really need to rely on that term partner. We need to leverage our relationships with these brands and help our rental venues now and once our doors reopen. Most museums these days have taken their museums to the social media channels, and they're rapidly turning out content. So ask your partners what they have that can be shared through the museum's social channels. Not only does this keep members engaged with our rental venues and our exhibits, but it also gives museums a much needed breather in producing content. For example, two of our partners, Nickelodeon and Warner Brothers, have both submitted links to us that we can post on the Children's Museum and our rental venues websites and social media channels that provide activities for families to do at home. And then lastly, another thing to think about with your brand partners, kind of piggybacking on what Cynthia said earlier, is how can you leverage your brand partners to help bring people back through the doors once the museum is reopened? Can your partners maybe sponsor a character meet and greet? Can they help get that special object, a really cool one-of-a-kind object, to a venue for display? Can the brands do some promotional work on their social channels? So anything that can really just help drive attendance to these museums once we open the doors would be fantastic, if you can work with your brands on that. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about with the brands recently and our partnerships. So let me know if you have any questions about us.
Awesome. So our next layer of complexity are artifact loans, and I feel like this could be a breakout just on its own. But there were a couple of conversations that I've had that I want to just really quickly share. One is that most of my go-to folks for transporting artifacts have either shut down or have scaled back significantly. And that includes, you know, Crozier, US Art, Masterpiece has scaled back quite a bit. And there are some folks that are no longer providing art shuttles. I do know that Displays Fine Art Services is still operating as a broker, as well as ARTA. So I just wanted to share that with the group, as there's been a lot of ambiguity with who's operating and who's not, and who's available and working. And then I also just, if you do have any artifact loans, specifically for your traveling exhibitions, the other hot topic are the terms of display. So how many days that something actually can be on display. I know some museums are getting into kind of sticky situations in relation to that. So having a conversation with whoever is your partner in whatever the artifact loan is, and making sure that you are very clear on what those terms are. All right, and last but not least, we have some folks that are on the call that are dealing with live animals. So Shane, if you can just add in a couple of points here.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I mean, we've had a few different exhibits on the road during this, during the pandemic, all with their individual issues that have come up and learning experiences for us. We've had three different live animal exhibits with educators on the road, one with live animals and with no educators, and one without any live animals or educators. So we've kind of hit every aspect of what we do for our exhibits, and really the most important part that we have to take care of is the animals and our staff. So our educators are in the exhibit during the crisis, taking care of the animals, whether the museum is opened or closed. For the exhibits that have live animals but none of our educators, we had to try and adjust and get our animals out. So being able to move our animals at a moment's notice was quite important. Having that in our contracts as well, that we need to be able to have access to the exhibit and the museum, even if it's closed, or access to staff that are able to let us in. That's pretty important for our animal care protocols. Moving forward, we're looking at different ways we can help the museum reopen. So even during our close, when the museum have been closed, we've been working with them on social media, doing little mini interviews with the animals, little mini shows, and then trying to get people back in the doors. How are we going to adjust our exhibits to make them bring people back into the museum? So either having less interactives and more animals on display, more hand sanitization, more signage on how to wash your hands properly. It's pretty important for just public safety. Yeah, I think that's about it. Any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. We'd be happy to help you with any of your contract ideas.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane.
There was one more question kind of related to contracts, but just overall that came up in the chat about extensions and venues asking for extensions or asking for some prorated rates because of not being able to display for the length of time. Had a couple of questions about that.
Sure. Anyone on the board, would you like to field how you're approaching this? I know this is a sensitive topic. All right, I think this one we can probably take offline as well. We're trying to figure out for our next one if we can do some polls so we can people can respond anonymously. All right. So yeah, we also just wanted to quickly chat about preparing for storage, as we know that that is a concern for a lot of you and trying to figure out exactly how to go about it. So John Shaw with Museum EXP was just going to quickly go over a couple of things to keep in mind and tips.
Hello, everyone. This is probably not a new thing for many of you who have exhibits, putting them into storage, but we thought it might be good to have a quick refresher of just some tips and things to keep in mind if you're putting your exhibits in storage, and maybe you haven't for a while, if you've been fortunate to keep, going directly from one site to the next. The most important thing is sort of like just keeping everything together. It's so easy for pieces and parts to get lost, especially if you are using an open crating system. So wrapping all of those crates, and if you have any loose pieces, securing those to larger pieces. So if things do get moved, once you put them into a storage facility, they don't become separated. So wrap everything, shrink wrap it, it's your friend. Secondly, if you're going into a storage facility, use that vertical height. You're gonna pay by square foot. So stack those things as high as you can. If you can double stack some smaller crates or whatever you can do to sort of minimize that footprint, do that. Third, make sure you have an inventory, tag each and every item that goes in. Just like you're a moving company, moving household items, you want to make sure that you've got a list of everything that's supposed to go into storage, and then when it comes back, you can have that same inventory list and check things off as they get loaded back into the trucks. Your crates, you have stuff that might be in there that's going to be sensitive to temperature and humidity, your electronics, your paint, your batteries. If you are in you're in a pinch and you're in a storage facility that maybe doesn't have the best temperature control, humidity control, you just need to get it in a space, you might want to pull out some of those things that are going to be more sensitive to the humidity, or throw some silica gel packs into crates so that you can make sure when you pull things out of storage that everything is ready to go. Let's see, secure your valuables. I know that one of the things I always try to do is make sure the toolbox is locked when you're going into storage, because you just don't know if someone's going to borrow a wrench and not put it back. And of course, this probably should have been higher up on the list, but vetting your storage facility is probably the number one concern here. You want to make sure that you've gotten some reviews of the storage facility. You know what their security protocols are. You know what temperature controls they have in place, how they deal with pest control. These are the big things that you don't want to be surprised with later on when you pull your exhibit out of storage. And lastly, insurance. Make sure if you have venues cover your insurance, make sure your insurance policy is up to date and you've got coverage while you're in storage and not on display.
Yeah, so thank you, John. I know that we have probably a lot of questions about storage, and we do have some folks that that are on the line that can probably directly field those. Does anyone have anything to add, or any specific questions about storage? It looks like Elizabeth Hale says to also take photos of wrapped items going into storage for easy identification. That's a really good idea. The last photo is actually of an exhibit that I put into storage for the Science Museum of Minnesota. And by the end of wrapping everything looked almost identical. So
I suggest if you have a local storage facility where you guys are currently located, call them and see if they have locations in other parts of the country. If they're familiar with you, they might be willing to make you a discount on the rental space. So just something to think about. Or if you have an exhibit, say, I have an exhibit in Minnesota right now, so I'm going to reach out to the Minnesota Museum to see if they have a facility that they recommend that we use for storage. So use your resources.
Yeah, and it looks like Betsy also has a great tip to not forget to do any condition inspections prior to putting anything into storage. All right.
I have one thing. If you're a museum and you have an empty gallery space, you might consider using that as a place for providers to store their exhibits for a short time as well. So.
All right, Debbie.
Always the mute button. Wonderful, thanks. So what's next, right? That's what we're looking at now. And what, you know, we as the 10 board are here to put together communication and things that you guys need. So what we're really interested in hearing from you guys is, you know, what is of interest? Additional webinars were some of the ideas that we had. And if so, what topics are of interest to you all right now? Happy hours, virtual meetings of some sort, places for people to announce new exhibitions virtually, putting together resource documents, you know, safety protocols, cleaning protocols, sharing all of those resources. So as you're, you know, what we would like to do is really hear from you all about what it is that, that could help you. And so if you can join that LinkedIn group that I sent you a link for, that would be great. That's a great place to put your questions or things you would like to hear more about. Also, there will be a slide at the end of this presentation with contact information. You can contact anybody on the board as well. And also, I think somebody brought up sharing the contact list of everybody who joined for this call, so we'll be doing that also. So, you know, just talking a little bit next about how it's a really hard time, obviously, in our world. And that I think it's helpful to remember that some of the most groundbreaking ideas were conceived in challenging times. And with the luxury of hindsight, we know that these challenging times will give way to something really beautiful on the other side. So to be kind to ourselves right now, to be kind to each other. I think our industry is really uniquely poised to remind the world that better things are coming, and that museums are a great way to add value to our communities. People have always sought inspiration from museums, and you know, we believe the TEN board and the data shows that the public will really want and need museums more than ever after all of this is over. So I think that there are some silver linings in this. This is certainly a really challenging time, and it seems like right now there's way more questions than there are answers. But something wonderful is going to come from that. So we're stronger together, and you know, it's really important. Our doors are closed right now, obviously, but this isn't going to be the case forever. And while we're not on the other side of that, I do believe that we will get through it together and will be better in many ways. So for traveling exhibitions to remain essential when the pandemic passes, it's really important for us to come together as a community. And this webinar and our LinkedIn group and all of these efforts are just the first efforts to keep us communicating, to keep us sharing, to keep us united and flexible, kind, nimble, and most importantly, connected.
That was incredibly well said, Deb.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who participated in this call. Thank you to my fellow board members. We did put together a list of resources that we think are really great. There's also a link here for the AAM group. We'll be making this available and sending this out to everyone who is on the call today. And for those of you that did not, or who potentially had colleagues that were not able to get into the call, we'll be sending out the recording as well. So thank you, thank you. Stay tuned for what's coming up next, and please everyone stay safe and take care. We'll be staying on here for the next few minutes. If anyone does have any other questions, we're more than happy to field those. Thank you for contributing, Daniel.
You're welcome, no problem.
And Brody, yes, you can absolutely share this with anyone at your organization. And I will absolutely add the Aztec forum link too. I think you might have to register in order to fully access it. Let's see, it looks like we have a question from Laura Nix on how institutions are covering costs for unplanned storage. She says that she has a very low cost exhibition running on a very minimal budget and hasn't budgeted for extended storage. I think, you know, how I would probably approach this is very similar to how, to what Sarah was talking about, and really relying on the network. You know, I think all of us are really great resources to talk about or speak to different organizations that might be able to help you out if whoever is hosting the exhibition, or if you're not able to provide storage on site. Let's see here. Yes, and then also we're just going through the questions here. All of the links will be posted to LinkedIn as well. All right, and feel free to turn on your mics if you do have any other questions.
Could we do a providers only chat sometime?
Yeah, absolutely.
As well as I think Poll EV would be a good inclusion into this. Definitely. That's all I gotta say though.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. It looks like we have a question here from Pierre from Paris. He says, do you think this crisis will impact small museums, which will cut out touring exhibition activity and refocus to their core activity of producing cultural content and welcoming visitors? I mean, I think we probably all have our own thoughts on this. I personally think that we're going to see a resurgence of traveling exhibits because it's my opinion that traveling exhibits are what really truly they are positioned in a way that they're able to drive attendance and, you know, really kind of help some of these different institutions out. I don't know, Heather or Deb, who's still on, John, Daniel, if you guys have some thoughts.
This is Sarah, and I agree. I completely agree. People are going to want to see something new to drive them into the museum. But also you have to think about how museum staff have been off work now for months. So they're not in there developing new content for their museum. So right off the bat, they're not going to have anything new to share. And to get back up to speed, it's going to take time to develop new content to display for visitors. So a traveling exhibit kind of gives them the ability to work within a timeline that's more doable versus rushed.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I mean, the two main museum drivers are events and exhibits, and you know, traveling exhibits, although their price tag is large up front, they do offer a continuous new experience for members and individuals to come to the museum, especially if you're talking about, you know, branded materials that really do have a driving force of bringing people in. Unfortunately, it's not something that I think we're going to be geared towards for the next year or so, but it will come back and it will be strong. And you know, for those of us who have worked in steadfast museums, especially the smaller museums, events, although they do bring a, you know, big nice sugar rush of explosion of, you know, 2 to 3 times your regular capacity, they also exhaust your staff. exhibits don't tend to exhaust your staff. And so I think it'll be there. I don't think that's something that we have to worry about. I do think we have to worry about paying attention to being transmission sites in and of ourselves as our exhibits move around, but that's really my biggest concern.
And I do think that some of the smaller museums are going to look at their budgets really closely, especially over the next year to 2 years as they're impacted, and probably are going to, in the short term, look at cutting traveling exhibit budgets just to be able to make ends meet. So I think that's just a reality especially for smaller museums. I think some of the larger ones might maybe need that attendance boost a little bit more. But I think, in the long term, museums are going to see the value and need in traveling exhibits, but I think we got to be prepared for sort of the worst case scenario and the sort of drop off in short term demand.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious for the group, if you think that, with the current situation, if we're going to see a movement towards more revenue share type financial models for traveling exhibits. I'm seeing some nods.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we could also honestly see some sort of negotiation towards gross entry for those museums who don't have the ability, especially the smaller museums who don't have the ability to ticket into a specialized gallery. I could definitely see some sort of, low end base payment and then some sort of small percentage of general admission across the board in order to smooth things out a little bit and flow out the risk a little bit.
I think there's plenty more discussion we could have on this topic, and I think we'll know more, in the coming weeks too, once we start to see what museums' plans are for the rest of the spring and summer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, things are changing day by day. And so I think moving forward, the more connected that we stay, the better. So I do encourage everyone to, add yourselves to the LinkedIn group so that we can continue this conversation. We'd love to hear, what topics would be most beneficial, and we will look at having this be a regular series.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, I think we will probably sign off. Feel free to reach out to us. Again, if your colleagues were not able to make it onto the call, we will have the recording available as well as the slide deck, which has all of the links, and we will make that all available through the LinkedIn group. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for organizing 10 group.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.